And today I have the lovely Tsitsi Mutiti with me, and we are going to be discussing a really important subject. It's an investment strategy called pensions. Is it an investment strategy, Tsitsi?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very
an
much.
Investment strategy.
So a little bit about Tsitsi. Tsitsi has been in the wealth management industry for over 15 years, and today she is also known as an award-winning investment manager. So welcome, Tsitsi. Great to have you.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm glad to be here.
So funny we say that. So pensions. Let's talk about pensions. The word pensions itself, okay, I don't like it. It just sounds very old to me, which is why I put investment strategy in front of it. So is it an investment strategy?
It is, 100%
Okay.
it is. I mean, basically, a pension is an account where you will ideally be putting money in that account on a regular basis over a period of time. And normally it's a long period of time because you can only access that money on two occasions, in your mid-50s and then when you retire.
Right.
Yeah.
So long-term investment strategy
Yes.
or savings plan,
Yes,
as you said.
exactly.
So I must tell you a bit of my story. So when I was younger, when I started working from I was 17, and I never invested in a pension at that age. I mean, the 20, 30 pounds that they were asking to take from my salary to me was too much, and I didn't understand why. And coming from a Pentecostal background, we were told that Jesus is coming tomorrow. So as far as I was concerned, I was never going to live to see 50 anyway. So what's the point in saving? That was my money mindset, which is not a very good one, but it's one I adopted, right?
Yeah.
So a young person thinking about retiring, it's not going to be top of their priority list, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. There's a lot of things that young people have to deal with, and if I think about when I was younger, there were so many things that I was doing, and thinking about 60s, it just seems so far away,
Yeah.
right? So it's really about, I think the more we talk about it as, older people to the younger generation, the more the younger generation see how pensions work for the older generation, it will become easier. But I mean, let's face it, right now in 2023, a person in their 20s or 30s is thinking more about getting on the property ladder. How do they save? House prices in the UK at least are just skyrocketing. Food prices are going through the roof. And if you've just left university and you've just got your first job, you're now thinking about moving out and paying rent and all that. So there's so many things, and the pension is the last thing on the list because you're thinking about the stuff that you can benefit from now and not in 40, 50 years time. And as we've seen over the years, pensions have changed, the rules have changed, etc. So they're probably thinking, will there even be pensions? And what's the point? And if you go to some places, they'll be telling you the world is going to end.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
right. Or World War III's coming, or so. Why should we bother?
Yeah.
And then like I said with me and my story, that look where I am now, right?
Yeah.
Here I am now, mid-50s,
Exactly.
thinking about these things, thinking about am I going to take some of my pension early and so forth. Whereas back then I never thought. That was so far from where I thought. I mean, what was it like for you thinking about pensions?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and so I had to, anyone with a pension had to deal with the economy that was literally falling apart. And my idea of pensions was that they don't work because what I saw the older generation do with pensions, or how they were managing pensions, is they would go most people would go to the post office to get their pension payout, whether it was weekly or monthly. And for most people, there was only enough for them to go back home, right? To pay for the bus fare to go back home. So for me, I got into the wealth management industry with the idea that pensions are not worth it. They're pointless. You won't be able to touch that money because it will disappear. Because that's what I saw growing up.
Yes.
And I think since we're talking about the things we saw when we were growing up, it's important for people to recognize how powerful the lessons we learned when we were younger are, because they really impact the decisions we make as adults.
100%.
You know,
And we need to have these conversations, because when we do hear of success stories
yes,
or what people have done with their pensions, if that's not fed back to the younger generation, that becomes part of their why,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have that why, because no one ever tells you about it, or we're never talking about it, then you won't see the reason to do it.
100%.
I mean, one main reason, obviously me being older, that I see of doing it, is because if you're employed, your employer also contributes to your pension. So it's
Yes.
something for nothing, right?
Yeah, definitely. You know, why not? That's free money. And the great thing about a long-term savings plan is if you keep that money locked in, it's generally going to grow
Yes.
over time. You know, so the longer you leave it in, the larger the pot is going to grow. But obviously, money needs to keep getting added to it. So you know, if your employer is putting in a certain percentage, they tend to encourage you as an employee to put in
Yes.
a certain percentage. And sometimes some employers will say if you go over that baseline percentage, they will top up, they
Yes.
will add more.
Yeah, I remember one of my employees doubling it.
Yeah.
They would double what I put in.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, or match. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
double that. And then also, if you're putting into your pension, the government tends to add on top of that
As well.
20%. So there's a lot of extra benefits to doing the pension.
Yes, because you're not paying tax on it, right?
Exactly,
Absolutely.
you're not paying tax,
Yeah.
and also, you know, on the tax bit, the money that you put into your pension comes out of your gross, so it comes out before the tax calculation.
100%, definitely. So talk to me about, so if you're employed, so we know that if you contribute, your employer will contribute as well. Depends on your employer as to how much they will contribute. But what about those who are self-employed? So obviously being an accountant, I work with a lot of companies who are sole directors. They may not even have staff, it might just be them.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't have pensions.
Yeah. I think it's an issue. It is a really big issue in the self-employed space, because most people who are self-employed, any little bit of money that they have, they're actually putting into the business.
Exactly.
So them, in their minds, there's not enough to kind of put in a savings, because why ring fence that money there when you could be using it to grow the business? But what I would say to anyone who's self-employed is definitely speak to an advisor
Yes.
about your situation and how you can start building a pension pot, because ultimately the pension is for your future self and later on in life, and every little helps, right? So whatever little
speaking
you
about
can get.
Exactly, but talking about, you just mentioned they're speaking to a pension advisor, and that's another thing. So for the disclaimer for us, we're talking about pensions, but we're not going to give you advice on pensions. We are not qualified to do so. You need to speak to a regulated, FCA regulated, is
Yes.
it? Pension advisor.
Yeah.
They have special qualifications I definitely don't have, because a lot of people always ask me pension questions because they know what I do, being a money coach and an accountant, but I cannot give you pension advice and I would not do so. So we're having a conversation about our experience and so forth.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure I said that. So it's being self-employed, so definitely, and actually I think the other way to sell it is it can be a tax incentive, exactly what we said before, because if you have pay yourself a pension as a director, you're not paying tax on that as well. There's a tax incentive as well.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's a mindset then though, isn't it? Because it's like me, that 20-year-old person who's thinking, I don't want to take £20-30
Yes.
to pay into a long-term savings that I may never see. But then the success story is this, right? So I have a friend who, she's worked most of her life corporately and was always paying a pension. And that's the good thing with a pension, is when it comes out of your salary, because most of us focus on our net salary, what actually goes into our bank. We don't think about the gross, and we've got to pay our tax and insurance. The pension's already come out of it, so you don't see it.
Exactly.
Which is a good thing, because
Yeah.
you work with your net,
Yeah.
right? You work
Yeah.
with what you actually get into your bank account. So because you're not seeing it, it's automatically being done and it's growing, and you don't really even think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So when she reached the age where she could draw down from it, she was shocked with how much her pension pot had built up to. So clearly wasn't really checking it before, which
Yeah.
most of us don't, let's
No.
be honest, right? So for her, she was absolutely able to have a massive lifestyle change. She was able to immigrate to another country.
Wow.
She could buy property in another country because it was a lot cheaper
Yeah.
than buying in the UK, but also live a certain lifestyle that she had dreamed of doing. And she was able to use her pension to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, so that in itself is a reason why.
Yeah, and for all the sort of negative and dramatically bad stories about pensions, there are so many good stories, you know. For all of us, we are definitely going to be living much longer. You know, it's not unusual to hear of someone passing away at the age of 102 or even more.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can't rely on the state. And some people don't actually want to rely on the state because it means that they won't have a certain level of care or lifestyle that they want. So they want more out of, you know, their twilight years. So just knowing, having that confidence as you get to that point in your life that, you know, I will be able to do X, Y, you know, or leave the UK, immigrate to another country and live in the sunshine, you know, 365 days a year in my own house and whatever. That is something to look forward to.
100% it is. And the other thing for me, because I'm big on generational wealth as well, because for some people then it will also be the conversation of, well, I may not actually live to see my pension age. So what would happen to my pension pot? But that's where you're also creating generational wealth, right?
It is, yeah, because the pension is, it's such a great vehicle if you're thinking about the next generation. I mean, first of all, it's not included in the inheritance tax calculation when
which is huge,
pass away.
Right?
Well, and that's in the UK, right? So that's huge because if you've got 100,000 plus, you know, or even if you start taking action after watching this and you're going really aggressively and you end up with millions in your pension, that won't be included in the inheritance tax calculation at this point in time.
Yeah, they could always change
the
it later.
rules always change around
but
pensions.
Right now,
so right now, so that is, you know, it makes it such a good vehicle. I should say you are limited in how much you can put into your pension every year, but then if it's invested over the long term and you're regularly contributing, it should technically grow. So that's the first thing, inheritance tax, but also you can pass it on to the next generation. So you can state, I think they call it an expression of wish, who will inherit your pension when you pass away. So it could be one person, it could be a spouse, or you could skip the spouse and give it to children, and it can be split amongst a certain number of children. I think it's possible, but it's important to seek advice on this, whether it can stay within a pension as opposed to just going out as cash.
Right.
So if it stays as a pension to, you know, so say it's split amongst 4 children, but
it becomes part of their pension pot.
Yeah, exactly. And then they keep that growing until they reach retirement. So if you keep doing that over the generations,
my great grandchildren will be just, you know, won't need to work.
Exactly. And then what does that do for a community?
Exactly that, and it's why we need to have these conversations, because if we do have these conversations and we learn from each other, there's ways that we can definitely build as a community, which is what we need to be doing. So in terms of what would you, and I don't mean advice on pensions itself, but on the strategy to find out who to go to, like trust. I'll give you an example. So when I got my employee, I had to set up, because you have to now, to set up a pension, which I thought was a good thing.
It's good.
And I said to her, do you want a pension? I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you're having it. It's a good thing.
She's got no choice.
Yes, you're having it. No. And then I was at a business event, and there was lots of people exhibiting, and one was a pension advisor, pension fund, and they were explaining how they're ethical and stuff like that, and blah, blah, blah. So I did have a conversation with them. But I still just went with the ordinary one, right? So when you are looking, so there's 2 questions. Let me give you the first one. So, because trust comes into it as well. Where can we go for advice? So, if you're employed, I'm assuming your employer is what you probably would say. But if you're, so tell us for employed, and then tell us also if you're not employed.
Okay. So where would you go for advice if you are employed? I always say to people who come to me seeking advice for pensions, speak to your employer, speak to the HR department. if your HR department or personnel department, whatever they're called, have not arranged clinics or presentations where the company that's providing the company pension can come in and explain the product, then ask if they can do that, because these companies are happy to do that. If anything, it means that the employees are engaged. You know, the employees who've got pensions with them are more engaged and will potentially keep putting money in.
Yes.
So it's very helpful to them, but also for you as an individual, you get to understand what's happening with your money. And also if rules change, they can tell you, and it also puts a face to the company. I think it's always important to know who's actually looking after your money.
So if you're employed, go to your HR department and ask them if they can get the pensioned providers to come in and explain whatever. And I've had that done before where I've worked before, they've done that. If you're not employed, and so you work for yourself, self-employed, and now you're thinking, okay, I need to, where do you start?
So I always direct people to the Money Helper website, it's a government agency, but sort of independent government. It's been set up by the government to help people specifically with managing money issues, but because of the pensions, because pensions are really complicated. So start there. They offer free impartial advice, and then they can direct you to the right individuals or companies to go to. I mean, you could also look around in your local area and see.
Google. Could you not just Google and get the 100 and 300?
You could, but I find that people tend to be quite overwhelmed.
Yes.
And with Google searches, it's all about who's paid the most money to get
at the top, right? Yes, exactly that.
So there might be a local company in your area, pensions advisor, you could go and speak to. And most advisors will give you a free introductory call, appointment, or advice. You know, so it's about having that initial discussion, and in most cases you have to have several conversations before you actually take action, because there's a lot involved in actually coming to the point where you start putting your money in a particular pension.
So that's the other thing I wanted to ask you as well and discuss, because like the gentleman that approached me at this business event, he was talking about their funds being ethical. And that's something I never thought about before. As to where or who my funds are being invested in. Can you talk about that?
I mean, it's so important to understand all of that, because ultimately a pension is your money. Your money is being invested. You're giving your money to a company to invest for you. And you might have strong feelings about certain things. You know, the common ones are tobacco, alcohol, and arms, you know, defense companies. So if you feel strongly about wars, etc., most people tend not to want their money invested in companies that benefit from those sort of things. So asking about where your money will be invested is important. And a lot of the bigger pension providers will have different types of what we call portfolios that will do. So some will be labeled ethical for whatever reason. They might focus on water, or you know, they might be ethical in the sense that these companies are taking steps to do things the right way. Because, you know, your money, when your money is invested, you're basically getting a share in a company, and when you get a share in a company, you get a voice in terms of how they do things. So that's where investing can be so powerful, because you can actually change the trajectory of a company by saying, you know, actually your practices are wrong, you should change. And, you know, a lot of companies have had to change their ways because of that. So there's the ethical thing, but then there's also the practical and everyday side of things, as in how much will you need every month to live on when you retire. And sometimes you have to go for some of the sin stocks, as it were. You know, oil and gas is another one that some people say, oh, we don't want to invest in. But some of these companies actually pay good dividends, and you can get good income from. So it's so important to have those conversations with the pensions advisors, because then they can walk you through what can be done based on your criteria.
Yes.
And then
you may find you're not so ethical at all.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen it. We saw it when Russia invaded Ukraine. For decades, a lot of investors did not want any of their money put into defense companies.
Right.
So people are thinking now, what if we get invaded? And sort of taking a different stance. So, when it comes to strategy, it changes. It changes with your age, your circumstances, your health, what's going on in the world. So for me, I always say talk to the advisors, understand what they're doing. And also the advisors might change because of what's going on in the world. So sometimes the changes aren't because of you and your circumstances. Sometimes it's because of what's happening in the world, what regulation is now saying is acceptable and not acceptable. So it's important to know that, because ultimately it's your money.
And so also there's the importance of then regularly checking.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know I get annual statements, but I've also got an online portal that I'm more recently, I'm looking at more actively than I used to before, because it's yours, and
yes, it is.
You do have a say, right? You do. Yeah. Because when you were just saying that, so if some rules and regulations came in, and say my funds were invested in company A, and now would my pension funders just move it to company B? Would they have to tell me first, or ask me, or how does that work?
Yeah. So for the average person, they would just do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if you are invested in a way where they have to tell you first, that would increase the fees.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, they just tend to do it, and which is why it's good to check. I will say, however, that be very careful about checking too often, because if you're a long-term investor, so if you're in your 40s and you're only going to touch the money in your 60s, what's happening today may not really be relevant to you, because you've still got another 20 years to go.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's being managed by someone, if someone else is looking after you, they will be dealing with the headache of any fluctuations in the market.
That's their job.
That's their job. But at the same time, you want to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, some people have lost their pensions. So don't just sit back and close your eyes, but also just, if you're having conversations with the pension provider, or you've got an advisor, and you're having a conversation once a year or once every 2 years, you should be okay.
Plus, they usually tell you your projections, right?
They do.
Based on what's happening in the market at that particular time. This is what the projections is, and we know projections isn't. But so that's another reason why I'm calling it an investment strategy, right? Because investments, we know, can go up and down.
Exactly.
Right? They can go up and down.
Yeah.
So it's something to bear in mind.
Yes.
That pensions tend to be less riskier.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Especially today, there's a lot more regulations around, because of what happened back in the day.
Yes. This is why when it comes to pensions, you have to speak to someone who is qualified to deal with pensions, because the rules are changing all the time. And it's also for your own protection.
Mm-hmm.
There have been so many horror stories in the press about people losing money because they went to people who may not have been qualified enough to recommend that type of product or the pension, or maybe at that point in time there was not enough regulation for those products. It's quite boring, but a lot of us in the industry, all we talk about is regulation. It's a nightmare for us, but it's there to protect us as practitioners, but also the public as well.
Yeah, which is important. Wow, so that's been a really good conversation. So, I mean, for me, my main takeaways is the investment. Where is my funds being invested, rather, and also make sure that I am speaking to somebody who is qualified to give me the advice as well. And just to encourage younger people and encourage your own families, your children, your nephews, your nieces, whoever, as to why a long-term strategy for saving that what
Yes.
we're calling it
Yes,
now?
yes.
Yeah, long story
Same
transition, I
thing.
can't calling it pensions anymore. But why it's a really good thing to do, and even if their thoughts are, oh, I may never get to that age. Well, it's good to build generational wealth as well, right? And leave something behind.
Exactly.
We're building communities, and that's what it's all about. So
Can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
When it comes to pensions advice, there is a week in October, I believe.
okay,
Correct. I'll be, if Google will correct me. If you just Google, and
is that every year in October?
every year,
Okay.
if you Google, if you're in the UK watching this, and Google Pension Week,
Okay.
there is a week when pension advisors give free advice
Oh,
on
there you go.
pensions. So
That's good to know.
I always encourage people to just, contact your local friendly pension advisor, or, do a Google search. And LinkedIn is a good place to look for advisors who'll be doing that, because they tend to put that out on LinkedIn. And have a chat with them.
And talking about LinkedIn, is that where we can find you?
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn, Tsitsi Mutiti Chartered FCSI. That's me on LinkedIn. Or you can find me at The Wealth Conversation on Instagram or Facebook, and email me at info@thewealthconversation.com.
And podcast?
Oh, yes, I keep forgetting about that. I do have a podcast which is called The Wealth Conversation. As you can tell, I like talking about wealth.
Yeah, we like talking about it. We're going to keep talking about it.
Yeah. And there is actually an interview that I did with a pensions advisor on pensions, why you should have it, some of the tax benefits, etc. So yeah, listen to that interview on my podcast, The Wealth Conversation.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having
And to
me.
make what some people think is a boring subject more realistic, and to tell us why we should. Okay?